number 15, Texas A&M, 2.5-point favorites against Auburn. The over-under I have is one flashback to the most significant feeling game ever played between a pair of 5 and 7 teams. That was the last time these teams played at Jordan-Hare.
Mm-hmm.
It was, in many ways, in my opinion, the perfect it just means more game, okay, in a lot of different ways. And I think you had to experience it. That's one of those you had to be present to watch it, even if you're just watching the replay. The full excitement of that night and what it meant for Cadillac to win that game, that 13-10 rock fight. I think you had to have been present to think that this is even possible in any sort of way. But here's the question.
Okay.
That win that night 2 years ago against A&M, wherein Cadillac is there, it's swag surfing, it's all the above, the single most underrated rap song of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the best win for Auburn in the 2020s, but is that Auburn's best football moment of the 2020s?
Oh, man. Of the 2020s. I mean, honestly, this sounds whatever, but I feel like the overtime game against Bama was probably right there when they lost it.
But they lost, and which one? Which overtime game?
Oh,
no,
man.
only one overtime game. Overtime game. Gravedigger was not an overtime game. My bad.
Yeah. But you're right. I think it's a win. Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and again, not the best win. 2021 against the top 10 Ole Miss team. That was the best win that Auburn's had in the 2020s. That was also the last time that Auburn beat a Power 5 team that finished with a winning record. Still trying to overcome that. TBD on if that'll happen this year. Definitely, unless Kentucky would have to win out in order for that to happen. So still going to be fighting for that in these last 2 games. But yeah, I mean, go back to 2020, you had the reduced crowds. So I don't think any game from that season would qualify. 2019 Iron Bowl, that was a better moment because obviously it's the Iron Bowl, but that's the 2010s that we're talking about. I just think that given how eager Auburn was to rid of the stench of the Brian Harsin era, I just think that is the best Auburn football moment of the 2020s. And maybe I'd have to ask Cole about that, but he was obviously there for that.
Oh my gosh, you know what, man? I forgot one. Bo Nix sure did smoke LSU.
2021. I thought about that as well. That the best play of Bo Nix's career was that night, wherein he burned, I think, 500 calories on one scramble and touchdown toss. I believe he threw that to Jake Fromm's brother, if I'm not mistaken, Tyler Fromm.
I think I do remember. Yeah, I remember I was at a wedding for that, and I was like, yeah. So I do remember that. And the following Halloween, they also smoked LSU. So those are the 2 other.
Yeah, that was a big time moment. Yeah, you know what? And maybe because we don't get to see it as much, it's a little bit different if we're talking about the home crowd. Mm-hmm. But certainly a case to be made. Yeah, that game was very monumental. At least it felt like at the time. But yeah, spoiling A&M's SEC championship and playoff hopes by keeping bowl eligibility alive would have a chance to be maybe Auburn's best football moment of the 2020s, at least best football moment in the last couple of years. The odds makers certainly suggest there's a good chance of that happening. Very small spread. Would be interested if this spread stays less than a field goal. Seems like it could happen. Hugh Freeze's only power conference win at home since he took this job was last year against Mississippi State, who, in case you forgot, went 5-7. They fired Zach Arnett in the middle of his first and only season in Starkville. 2 things could be true at the same time. We talked about this a lot, but it bears repeating, especially in a matchup like this.
I'm sorry for the YouTube audience. I'm not in a Twilight Zone episode. It looks like there's a gust of wind going through the autumn trees, and it's just putting an insane amount of light on my face. So, I'm not getting sucked away or anything. Continue.
If you are, just let me know. Just text me if you're getting sucked away. That's fine.
I'll text you. Yeah.
Happens to the best of us. Yeah, you're good. I think 2 things can be true at the same time. Maybe you'll disagree with this, but I think one is that Auburn fans are still awesome, and that crowd can absolutely turn water into wine. Okay. Perhaps more than any other crowd in college football, they can turn water into wine. I'm confident in that. The other thing is that Jordan-Hare magic, it's not exactly working with this team.
Yep.
And it's not an indictment of the fan base. It's just for whatever reason. Early on, you could point to the turnovers. Lately, turnovers actually haven't been that bad. It's crazy to think. Auburn's last game with multiple turnovers was week 4 against Arkansas. They've really taken care of the football better. They still have just found ways to lose games. And obviously the fourth quarter woes have surfaced all too many times. And you know what? I get that it's not technically a turnover to send out Towns Magoo for a 52-yard field goal, but it might as well be.
Yeah, I call that a turnover on downs.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to take that off the record. That multiple turnovers in some of those games, definitely since week 4.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news for Auburn. A&M's defense, though it struggled at South Carolina in that electric atmosphere, I think they can torture Peyton Thorne. Mm-hmm. I really do. I expect that they'll do just that, and I think that that's going to overshadow probably a good defensive performance from Auburn. I would expect to see Auburn's defense to continue to play well. You look at the running numbers, the rushing numbers that they have allowed over the course of the last month or so, and you're like, dang, they are not quitting whatsoever. That has developed into a real strength of this team. By the way, this needs to be said. Let's all give Mike Elko a little bit of a break for his press conference slip-up, Freudian slip of sorts that he had. If you missed it, he was asked about focusing on the task at hand and not looking ahead to Texas. And ironically enough, he ended that answer by saying, our focus is single-handedly on Texas. I mean Auburn. The man corrected himself, okay? Mm-hmm. We have slip-ups like that all the time in front of a microphone. It happens so many times. I'll correct you, you'll correct me. And both of us, when we're in the wrong, we'll say, what did I say? Mm-hmm. It happens. It mm-hmm. happens. Even as Will is about to get sucked into a black hole because of this white light that's over his face. It can happen. All right. Mm-hmm. Elko realized he did it in the moment. And that is not something that I do a lot. If I make a mistake, I'm just breezing right through it. I'm going on to the next thing. And it takes someone actually correcting me, usually. But I realize that's not going to stop Texas fans from saying rent-free. I also realize that if A&M's playoff hopes and ICC championship hopes come to an end because of a loss to a 4-6 Auburn team, everyone will connect those dots and say, who in the world was A&M focused on? Because it didn't feel like Auburn. It felt like maybe they were a little bit too focused on Texas. That would be dumb, but I get it. That's the world that we live in. Aggies win this one 27-17.
You know, man, just because it's a little bit of cake week, I'm going to go ahead and pick a second upset here.
Ooh.
I think that, this Auburn team, as we said ad nauseum, and what's funny, man? They had ULM last weekend. We saw them obviously lose to Vandy. So, this is something I'm a little guilty of. I won't say that you are because you got it right on every team. But we have our let's call it, I don't know, 10 teams at the beginning of the year that we're okay, I need to know a ton about these teams. And Auburn are just not fun to watch at all. So I'm not even enjoying them imploding in these games. And so
they're fun to watch against bad teams. I'll give them that. It's fun to watch Cam Coleman try to be covered by Louisiana Monroe corners, but then you think to yourself, why am I actually watching Cam Coleman against ULM corners? This doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and as I look through this too, they don't really hear me out here. Points wise, they don't have a lot of bad losses. They don't have a lot of blowout. You could make an argument that several good SEC teams have worse losses than Auburn when it comes to 6-point loss to Oklahoma. Yeah, you lost by 20 to Georgia, but who among us? That was actually kind of a close game at half. Okay, you lost by 4 to Mizzou. So I'm not gonna say necessarily that they've been improving because in here we have a massive 4-game losing streak, and you could you lost 5 of 6. Too. But at the same time, at some point, I truly feel like I've watched some of the most unqualified football staffs at Auburn find a way to compete with Alabama, Georgia, whoever. Hugh Freeze did that against Georgia a couple of years ago or last year. So point being, I think that this has to be that game. We talked about water finding their level in the last upset with Mizzou, where A&M also maybe has been running a little bit hot. I think the South Carolina game proved that. Again, the LSU game sure didn't. I get it. But at the same time, you have all this stuff ahead of you. You're a little bit ahead of schedule. And I see this as almost the version of that where it's you got a first-year head coach. You're kind of in the driver's seat still for the SEC championship game. I think that this team is a little bit worse than their record, and these things always find a way to reveal themselves. And at the same time, we've talked about Hugh Freeze isn't really – I don't know. Is Hugh Freeze on the hot seat? I feel like I've just stopped thinking about that.
If I had to guess, I would say that even if they lose these 2 games, which they're not expected to win in theory based on the spread,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that he still gets a year 3. 20.6 million, I believe, is the buyout. I'm just trying to, that's off the top of my head. I'm not exactly sure if that's the final number of what it would be at the end of the regular season, but I don't believe that he will be fired. Never say never, especially with an AD that has already fired a year 2 coach. We don't need to name who that year 2 coach was. It was definitely Joe Moorhead.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that he's probably safe in getting a year 3, even if they get waxed in these final 2 games.
You know, I'm not going to go with the whole tangent here, but the thing that Joe Moorhead didn't have is the only thing Hugh Freeze have, which is just like folksy Southernism. It's actually kind of funny that could be.
How dare you? That man acclimated in every possible way to his Southern surroundings, and yet they still called him a Yankee, and they still had to drag his Yankee you-know-what out of there.
Literally, it's like that's kind of funny that I'm like, why is Hugh Freeze not getting fired? This is horrible compared to expectations, and it's just that everybody kind of knows him, and like your mom remembers him and stuff, so it's like, yeah, donors will be fine. Anyway, I say all of that to say, I feel like, Auburn could go into the offseason with more hopium. This is a game that they need to win for me to have any faith in Hugh Freeze going forward. I think that, we talked about they haven't had their Jordan Hare game this year. They're at Alabama, as you noted, that website 2004 layout. I apologize. Now, granted, the Auburn website just almost crashed my computer, so they're not doing much better. But point being, I think I think that ideally you want to win one of these last 2. I don't think it's in the cards for them to beat this Bama team. So A&M, with kind of their lack of depth, vulnerability, stuff like that, I don't think that Auburn is a better team than A&M. I don't think they've shown that to any degree. But at some point, they got to win one of these weird Jordan Hare games that's the last thing to take away from an Auburn coach. Gus was great at it. Harsin had a couple and almost had a couple. It's like Hugh has totally just punted the only thing that making an Auburn like okay, you got to play Georgia and Alabama, but you get this crazy home field. He's like, I'll pass. I don't want that. I want to have Towns and Magoo out there. So yeah, I think this is going to be a like 3-point upset by Auburn.
Watch this end up being like a 200-yard game from Jarquez Hunter, and he just looks like he's just shot out of a cannon the entire night, and he's just fresh and looking incredibly good. And watch this just be a game that Auburn never looks like it's going to lose, and it feels similar to what South Carolina did to A&M a couple weeks ago. Right. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm on the record with a double-digit A&M win, but watch this be the thing that kind of shakes up the SEC picture down the stretch. For what it's worth, as a fan of college football, I want A&M to play against Texas next week with massive stakes. Okay. So maybe there's part of me that wants to manifest that a bit. I'm so looking forward to the return of that rivalry that there's definitely a part of me that's like, gosh, just get us to that game, with that game meaning everything for both of those teams. That would be a lot of fun. Certainly Auburn has a chance to disrupt that.